It was just an envelope, thin, white, no markings on the outside, no perfume, no return address. It looked like nothing. But the moment I held it in my hands, I felt a cold weight settle in my chest, like my body already knew what my heart refused to believe. I opened it slowly, the paper trembling between my fingers. Inside, on glossy cardstock, printed in elegant golden letters, was the end of everything I had once called love. James Walker. That was his name. And next to his, printed just as proudly, was hers. A stranger, a woman I had never seen before. Beneath their names was the date, the venue, the celebration, their celebration, of a new beginning, a new life, one that should have been ours, one that had been built on top of my silence, my sacrifice, and my trust. I stared at that card like it was written in another language. My name wasn't there, my face wasn't in the picture, but every part of that wedding was made possible by me, by my body, by my documents, by the love I gave so blindly. He used me, used my visa, used my existence, and then he left me here, in Mexico, alone, stripped of everything, even my name. They say the hardest betrayals are the ones you never see coming, but that's a lie, because somewhere deep inside, you always feel the shift, the change in tone, the quick glances away, the forced smile, the moments when the person you love looks at you and you suddenly feel invisible. But I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't, because if I admitted it was happening, that meant everything I had sacrificed, leaving my family, moving to a foreign country, trusting a man who held the keys to my life, was for nothing. So I convinced myself it was stress, that he was just distant, that the secrets were temporary, that the fear I felt growing inside me was just in my head, until that envelope arrived, until my replacement had a name, a face, a dress, and an address. I remember the sound of my breath as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the invitation, shallow, trembling, my heart beating so fast it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. The walls of the small room around me suddenly felt too close. The cheap fan above my head spun lazily, mocking me with its slow rhythm. The light flickered once, twice, then held. I hadn't paid the electric bill that month. I was living off of borrowed money, borrowed time, and a borrowed name. And now even that had been stolen. How do you explain to someone that the man who promised you forever disappeared across the border with your identity? That he filed paperwork under your name for another woman? That the love he gave you was just a strategy? That you became disposable the moment your part in the plan was complete? I tried to stand up, but my legs gave out. I crumpled to the floor, the invitation still clutched in my hand. It didn't even feel real. None of it did. But the ache in my chest, the one that twisted like something sharp lodged between my ribs, that was real. That was screaming. That was a truth I couldn't unsee. I think what hurt most was not the betrayal. It was realizing how completely I had given myself to someone who saw me as nothing more than a path, a bridge, a document. I didn't just lose a husband. I lost the version of myself that believed in him. The woman who smiled in wedding photos, who made his favorite meals, who stood in long immigration lines just to hold his hand when he was nervous. She was gone. She died the moment he replaced her. And I was left behind. Not in Texas, where we lived together. Not in the home we shared, where I folded his shirts and organized his tools. But in a country I didn't belong to. Without a passport, without a support system. Without even the language to explain what had happened to me. That's the thing they never tell you about betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart. It erases you. It takes your voice, your safety, your history, and leaves you stranded in the space between who you were and who you no longer have permission to be. I wanted to scream, but the room was too small. The air was too thin, and no one would hear me. He made sure of that. He planned it, every part of it, and I had walked straight into the trap, smiling. If you've ever felt used like that, like your love, your life, your soul was a transaction to someone, then you know the silence that comes after, the paralyzing disbelief, the shame that makes you feel like maybe you deserved it, that maybe you should have seen the signs. Maybe you did. I need you to do something for me. If this story echoes even a part of your own pain, write it down in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever been betrayed by someone you gave your life to. Say, I matter, in the comments. Not for me, for you. So other women like me can find each other in this sea of silence. And if you believe that stories like this must be told, that they can't stay hidden, subscribe to this channel. Here, we speak the truth no one else wants to say out loud. Here, we remember that surviving isn't just a choice, It's a revolution, because I was left behind, but I am not gone, and I'm not done speaking. My name is Laura Martinez Hernandez. I am 39 years old, and the woman you see now is not the one who crossed that border full of dreams and quiet hopes. The woman I used to be believed in small things. She believed that if you worked hard, stayed kind, and loved honestly, the world would somehow love you back. She was simple, soft-spoken. She smiled more than she should have. She apologized too often. She trusted too easily, especially when it came to men like James. I grew up in a small village in the south of Mexico, where girls were taught to dream of safety more than success, where love meant survival, and marriage was the fastest way out of poverty. I didn't come from money. My father died when I was 10, and my mother worked as a seamstress, stitching hope into dresses other women would wear for better lives. We didn't talk about emotions. We didn't ask questions. We just endured. I moved to San Antonio, Texas when I was 21. I had a temporary visa and a job as a caregiver for an elderly couple. My English was broken. My clothes were plain. I sent most of my paycheck back to my mother, who used it to care for my younger brother. I didn't go out much. I didn't make friends. I was scared of everything and everyone. But I felt lucky, because even though I was invisible in most rooms, I was building something, or so I thought. James was the first person who looked at me like I mattered. He was older, American, confident, the kind of man who took up space wherever he went. He saw me in the grocery store. I was comparing prices on rice. I didn't even notice him until he spoke. "You look like someone who makes good arroz con leche." That was his opening line. I laughed awkwardly and told him I did. He smiled and said, "Then I guess I just met my future wife." No one had ever flirted with me like that. Not with humor, not with ease, not with admiration. He asked for my number. I gave it. That night I couldn't sleep. My phone stayed under my pillow. When he messaged the next day, it felt like something in the universe had shifted. Like maybe, just maybe, my life was about to begin. We went on our first date the following weekend. He took me to a diner. Simple, classic. He said he didn't believe in fancy restaurants, that real people didn't need candles and violin music to connect. He talked most of the time, but I liked that. I liked watching the way he moved his hands when he told stories. I liked the sound of his laugh. I liked that he asked me questions and waited for my answers. James made me feel seen, like I was more than just another immigrant girl cleaning someone else's kitchen. He told me I was beautiful without makeup, that my accent was sexy, that I was the kind of woman men prayed for but rarely found. I didn't know then that these words were his bait, that behind every compliment was a calculation. He proposed 6 months later. We had dinner at the same diner where we first met. He ordered the same burger. He wore the same shirt. I thought it was romantic. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I didn't hesitate, because I believed him, because he made me believe in me. We had a small wedding, nothing fancy, just a few friends and a borrowed dress. My mother watched on video call. She cried the whole time. James kissed me with so much passion that I forgot how scared I was. I wasn't a citizen. I didn't understand the immigration system. But James said not to worry, that he would handle everything, that I was his wife now, that I belonged. I moved into his house the next day. It was a small place in the suburbs, with a broken fence and a backyard full of weeds. I loved it. I planted flowers, cleaned every corner, hung photos of us on the fridge. I made it our home, or what I thought was ours. At first, everything felt like a dream. He made me coffee in the mornings, left sticky notes on the mirror that said things like, "My beautiful wife," and "I miss you already." He held my hand in public, called me mi amor in front of strangers. I thought I had won the lottery, but little things started to change, subtle, slow, like the way he would silence my calls when I was at work, the way he joked about how much I talked when I was nervous, the way he rolled his eyes when I asked to call my mother. "Again?" he would say. "You just talked to her yesterday." And I would shrink every time. He told me not to speak Spanish in public, said people would think I was talking about them, that I was being rude, that it made him uncomfortable. He didn't want me to have a job, said he could take care of everything, that a real wife stayed home, that we didn't need anyone else. I stopped going to church, stopped calling my friends, stopped laughing out loud. I thought I was being a good wife. I thought this was what marriage looked like, that maybe love meant adjusting, maybe love meant silence. But deep down, I missed myself, the girl who hummed while cleaning, who danced in the kitchen, who dreamed of becoming a nurse. I missed her, but I buried her, because James said he loved me, and I didn't want to lose that. I wish I had seen the warning signs. I wish someone had taught me that love should never feel like fear, that you don't owe anyone your freedom just because they gave you a last name. That being chosen isn't the same as being safe. By the time we reached our 5th anniversary, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. She was tired, small, nervous, but she still held on to hope, still thought maybe he would come back to the man he was, still believed that maybe a trip together would bring them closer. So when James suggested we go to Mexico for a romantic getaway, I said yes. He said it was a surprise, that he wanted to show me something special, that he had planned everything. I packed my bag like a good wife, kissed him like it was still the beginning, and boarded that bus with a smile. And now, here I am, in this room, with nothing but the memory of who I used to be, and the echo of his promise still ringing in my ears. If you've ever lost yourself inside someone else's story, if you've ever loved someone who made you disappear one piece at a time, I want you to know that you are not alone. Please take a second to leave a comment, even if it's just your name or where you're watching from. Say, I exist in the comments and remind the world that you are still here, that we are still here. And if you believe in stories that fight back, in voices that rise from silence, subscribe to this channel. Together, we rebuild what they tried to erase. Together, we rise. It started with the little things. A kiss on the forehead before he left for work. A cup of coffee already waiting on the kitchen table. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. Like I was something rare. Something he never expected to find but couldn't let go of now that he had. James had a way of making me feel like I was living in a movie. One where I had finally been cast as the lead after years of walking in the shadows. He said I reminded him of his grandmother. Gentle, faithful, the kind of woman who stayed. He'd tell me stories about how she kept her family together through wars and recessions and heartbreaks. How she never raised her voice, never complained, never left. I didn't know it then, but every one of those stories was a blueprint. He wasn't praising her strength, he was setting a standard. When I asked about adjusting my immigration status, he smiled and said he'd take care of it. You're my wife now, Laura. Let me worry about the paperwork. You just focus on being here with me. And I believed him, because it felt so good to be chosen, to be someone's priority. I had spent so many years being invisible that I clung to every ounce of his attention like it was air, necessary, addictive. I stopped asking about the process after a while. Every time I did, he would say something like, "Trust takes patience," or, "Don't you think it's nice not having to worry about all that stress?" He made me feel guilty for even bringing it up, like I was ungrateful, like I was rushing something that should be cherished slowly, and I wanted to be cherished, so I let it go. He told me I didn't need to work anymore, that he made enough for both of us. At first, it felt like a gift. I imagined finally going back to school, maybe taking some classes to improve my English, maybe studying nursing, like I had always dreamed. But every time I mentioned it, he'd say, "Why would you want to be around sick people all day when you can stay here and take care of us?" Us, as if there was a child already, as if being his wife meant my ambitions were a threat. He didn't yell. That's what made it so hard to see. There were no bruises, no slammed doors, just gentle redirections, just smiles that didn't reach his eyes, just silence every time I spoke about wanting more. My days began to shrink. I stopped going outside as much. He said it was dangerous, that I might get questioned, that someone might think I was undocumented and cause problems. "They don't look at you the way I do," he said. "They won't understand you're with me." I started to believe him. I started to fear things I had never feared before. The grocery store, the sidewalk, my own reflection. I cleaned the house twice a day. I cooked everything from scratch. I memorized his routines, when he liked his coffee, what days he watched football, how to fold his shirts the way his mother used to. I thought if I could just be perfect, if I could just make myself essential, he'd never want to let me go. Looking back, I see it for what it was, conditioning. He made me feel like my value depended on how little space I took up, how much I served, how well I obeyed. And I didn't call it control. I called it love, because that's what he told me it was. "I just want to protect you," he'd whisper, wrapping his arms around me when I looked scared. "The world is cruel, but you're safe with me." Safe. That word echoed in my mind so often it lost all meaning. We didn't have many visitors. He said his family didn't approve of our marriage, that they were traditional, that they wouldn't understand our kind of love. I never got to meet them. I don't even know if they exist. Now I wonder if any of what he said was real, or if I was just another role in a script he'd written long before we met. One night, I asked if we could go back to visit my mother. I missed her. Her voice over the phone wasn't enough. I hadn't seen her in years. James tensed immediately. "You know it's not safe," he said. "If you leave, you might not get back in. You don't want to mess up everything we've built." I nodded. I stayed, and something inside me began to rot. When I started getting depressed, he bought me vitamins instead of letting me see a doctor. When I cried too often, he suggested I cut back on phone calls to home. "They just upset you," he said. "You don't need all that noise in your head." He became my doctor, my priest, my world, and the world became very, very small. Some nights, I would sit in the bathroom with the door locked and stare at myself in the mirror, wondering who I was anymore. My skin looked pale. My eyes lost their light. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked obedient, polished, quiet, but not alive. He made me feel like a child and then punished me for not being a woman. He wanted submission and then resented the void that came with it. I started to notice how he looked at other women when we went out, how his compliments became less frequent, how his hands felt heavier when he touched me. But I didn't say anything. I was too afraid of what silence would become if it ended. I spent months in that fog, floating between days, holding on to the memory of our early love like it was a life raft. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that every marriage had ups and downs, that he was under stress, that things would go back to the way they were. They didn't. He began traveling more. For work, he said, but he never told me where, never gave me numbers to reach him. Sometimes he would come back smelling like perfume I didn't wear. I asked once and he said, "You're imagining things." And I believed him, because it was easier to believe him than to believe I had been lied to for years. One morning, I woke up and he was already gone. On the pillow, instead of a note or a kiss, there was a receipt, a dry cleaning bill. I stared at it for what felt like hours. A stranger's name was on the tag. Her name, the one I would learn later. The one printed on the invitation that would change everything. If any part of this feels familiar to you, please don't stay silent. Drop a comment below. Share your story. Even if it's just one sentence. Say, "I remember who I was" in the comments. And let that be the beginning of your voice returning. And if this story is speaking to something buried inside you, if you feel seen in any way, please subscribe. Your presence here keeps these stories alive. And sometimes, just knowing someone is listening is enough to keep breathing. It was our 5th wedding anniversary. 5 years since that small courthouse ceremony where he kissed my forehead and whispered forever against my skin. I wanted to believe that something had survived in us, that beneath the cold silences and half-truths, there was still a man who once looked at me like I was the only thing worth building a future with. So when James suggested a surprise trip to Mexico, I saw it as a sign, a chance to start over. Maybe he remembered who we were before the walls came up. He called it a second honeymoon, said he wanted to reconnect, said I deserved something beautiful after everything we had been through. I asked him if it was safe for me to travel, considering my immigration status. He smiled, kissed my hand, and told me not to worry. "Everything is handled," he said. "I took care of it. Just bring yourself." And like so many other times, I nodded, because trusting him had become a habit I didn't know how to break. We packed light, just one suitcase between us. He booked the tickets, printed the reservations, handled every detail. That should have been a red flag. He never handled everything. He always made me do the planning. But I told myself he was being romantic, that he was trying to take the weight off my shoulders. I wanted to believe in that version of him so badly that I ignored the tightness in my chest. We crossed the border by car. I remember the way the sunlight flickered through the windshield, the way he hummed to the radio, the way his hand rested on my knee, warm and reassuring. I stared out the window, watching the signs shift from English to Spanish, and told myself this was love, this was healing, this was the beginning of something new. When we arrived in Tijuana, it was already dark. The hotel was modest, clean, nothing fancy, but nice enough to feel like a getaway. I remember how the lobby smelled faintly of bleach and old wood. I remember the way the receptionist looked at me like she recognized something I didn't know I was showing. That night, James took me to a small restaurant nearby. We ordered tacos al pastor and shared a bottle of wine. He laughed more than usual, held my hand across the table, told me stories from his childhood that I'd never heard before. I soaked it all in like a thirsty plant leaning towards sunlight. I wanted to believe he still loved me, that he still chose me, that I wasn't invisible. Back at the hotel, we made love for the first time in weeks. He kissed me slowly, whispered things in my ear I hadn't heard in years. I fell asleep in his arms, the sound of his heartbeat beneath my cheek, finally at peace. The next morning, he was gone. At first, I didn't panic. I thought maybe he had gone downstairs for coffee or a walk. I waited. An hour passed. Then 2. I texted him, called him. Nothing. His phone went straight to voicemail. I went to the lobby, asked the receptionist if she had seen him leave. She said he checked out, without me. My hands started shaking. My mouth went dry. I ran back to the room. The suitcase was gone. My passport was gone. My ID, money, even my phone charger. The only thing he left behind was the empty wine bottle and a small folded towel on the bathroom counter. Panic is not a sudden explosion. It's a slow tightening, a closing of the walls, a silence that becomes deafening. I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like hours, trying to process, trying to understand. Maybe he had been robbed. Maybe something happened. Maybe he would come back. He didn't. I went to the consulate the next day, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. I waited in line for hours. When I finally got to speak to someone, I tried to explain my situation. The woman behind the glass listened with practiced indifference. When I told her I had no passport, no proof of identity, no phone, she looked at me like I was already disappearing. Without proper documentation, she said, there's not much we can do. I asked her to check for my immigration status. She said it was pending, that no adjustment had ever been finalized, that I wasn't technically a resident, that I was here in legal limbo, trapped between borders, belonging to no one. She handed me a list of shelters, told me to come back when I had paperwork, then called the next person in line. I walked out of that building with nothing, not even a name, just a sheet of paper with addresses for places that smelled like fear and desperation, and the growing realization that the man I trusted with my life had stolen it from me. I stayed in a church shelter that night. The cot was thin. The room was crowded, women crying softly into their pillows, children coughing, the air heavy with grief and mildew. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying not to break, but something inside me was already fractured. It was the silence, the total echoing silence from James. No messages, no explanation, nothing. He vanished, and with him went everything I thought I understood about love. I wandered the streets for days, looking for him, hoping for a sign, checking hotels, asking questions, repeating his name like a prayer. But prayers don't answer when they are built on lies. And every door I knocked on closed a little harder. I tried calling his old number from a borrowed phone. It had been disconnected. I sent emails from an internet cafe. They bounced back. It was like he never existed. The worst part was realizing that the trip was never about us. It was a transaction, a trap, a final move in a game I never knew I was playing. He brought me to Mexico, not to rekindle our marriage, but to disappear, to sever the last tie, to discard me in a place where I would have no voice, no power, no way home. I was disposable. I still remember the woman who offered me a sandwich near the bus station. She saw the panic in my eyes and handed me a paper bag without a word. It had a simple sandwich and a small carton of juice. That tiny act of kindness broke me in a way nothing else had, because it reminded me that I still existed, that I could still be seen, even in the ruins of someone else's betrayal. If you've ever been abandoned in a place where no one speaks your language, where no one believes your pain, where even your name becomes a question, I see you. Please share your experience in the comments, even if it feels too hard. You are not alone. Say, I deserve better in the comments, and let the world know we are more than what they tried to throw away. And if you believe in the power of stories that expose what others try to hide, subscribe to this channel. Every new voice here is a light in the darkness, and together we are impossible to ignore. I remember the exact moment my heart stopped pretending. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies. There was no thunderclap, no crying on the bathroom floor. It was quiet, cold, the kind of silence that wraps around your throat and waits for you to break. I stood in that tiny hotel room in Tijuana, staring at the door he walked out of, knowing with every part of my soul that he wasn't coming back. But I waited anyway, for hours. At first, I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe he had an emergency. Maybe he went to buy something. Maybe his phone died. Every excuse made my stomach turn, but I clung to them like they were life vests, because the alternative was too devastating to face, that he had abandoned me on purpose, that this was never a mistake, that I was not lost. I had been thrown away. I stayed in the room until the staff asked me to leave. The reservation was under his name, paid for 2 nights only. After that, I no longer existed in their system. Just like that, I was erased. I walked the streets with my backpack, which held almost nothing. No ID, no passport, just a half-charged phone with no service, $30 in cash, and a receipt from the dinner we had 2 nights before. That receipt was proof, not legal proof, but emotional. I needed to hold on to something real, something that said I wasn't crazy, that he had been there, that he had looked into my eyes and smiled while planning my disappearance. I slept outside for the first time that night, on a bench near the border wall. The concrete was colder than I expected. I curled into myself, using my thin jacket as a blanket. I didn't sleep much. The sounds of the city at night felt like a language I couldn't speak. Cars honking, dogs barking, people arguing. It all sounded far away and painfully close at the same time. When the sun rose, I walked to the U.S. consulate. It felt like the last place on earth where someone might listen. I stood in line for hours, sweat sticking to the back of my neck, my legs aching. I rehearsed what I would say over and over in my head. I imagined someone kind behind the glass, someone who would see the fear in my eyes and say, "We've got you," but that person didn't exist. When I finally made it inside, the woman behind the counter barely looked up. Her voice was monotone, efficient, tired. I explained that my husband had brought me to Mexico and disappeared, that I was a U.S. spouse, that my passport had been taken, that I had nowhere else to go. She blinked slowly, then asked for my full name and date of birth, typed something into her computer, paused. "There's no active visa under your name," she said. I froze. "That's not possible," I whispered. "He was taking care of everything. He told me it was all filed." She tilted her head. "There's no record of any recent adjustment to your status. If you're undocumented, I suggest contacting local authorities or immigration attorneys. We can't assist further without identification." I felt the room spin. My fingertips went numb. I was trying to speak, but nothing came out. She was already waving the next person forward. I walked out of the building in a daze. That day, I learned what it feels like to disappear while still breathing. I didn't just lose my papers. I lost my name, my right to be heard, my place in the world. I was a shadow, a ghost walking in sunlight. That week, I slept wherever I could, in doorways, on benches, sometimes in internet cafes that didn't ask questions. I started washing in gas station bathrooms, brushing my teeth with bottled water, pretending I was just a tourist who had a rough night. Shame became a second skin. I didn't tell anyone my story. Not yet, because I didn't have the words, just the pain. One day, I went to a local church. They offered free breakfast. I sat in the back, quiet, trying to look small. A woman brought me a plate of eggs and beans. Her name was Rosa. She had kind eyes and wore a faded apron with little sunflowers stitched into the corners. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She just sat beside me and said, "You're not the first." That sentence opened a door inside me, a floodgate I had held shut with both hands. I started crying, silently at first, then shaking. Rosa held my hand the entire time. She told me that she had seen many women come through those doors with the same story, different names, same betrayal. Husbands who used their citizenship like a weapon, who brought their wives to Mexico to disappear them, knowing that without papers, without support, they would become invisible, powerless, forgotten. I wasn't the first. I wasn't special. This was a pattern. I remember thinking, how many of us are walking around, erased by love that was never real? Rosa gave me a place to sleep that night, a cot in the back room of the church. It was nothing more than a mattress on the floor with a thin blanket, but it felt like safety. Like someone had finally turned on a light in the dark. That evening, I looked at myself in the small mirror above the sink. My hair was tangled. My eyes were swollen. My skin had a gray tint from days under the sun. I didn't recognize myself, but for the first time in weeks, I saw something behind the exhaustion. A spark, small, distant, but still alive. The next morning, Rosa gave me a flyer. It was for a legal aid organization that helped women who had been victims of fraud and abuse across borders. I held it like it was gold, like it was hope in paper form. I didn't know then how long the road would be, how many more times I would be ignored, dismissed, treated like a liar. But that morning, I took my first real step back to myself. If you've ever felt like your life was stolen while you were still inside it, please leave a comment below, even just a few words. Say, "I was there," if you've ever been left behind, emotionally or physically. You don't need to explain everything. Just let yourself be heard. And if you believe that no one deserves to be discarded, subscribe to this channel. This space was created for stories like mine. And maybe stories like yours, too. Together, we take up space again. Together, we reclaim what they tried to erase. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The air was dry, the kind that makes your throat ache even when you're not speaking. I was folding donated clothes at the church when Rosa called me over. She had a phone in her hand, her face unreadable. She said someone had replied to the email I sent from the internet cafe 2 weeks ago. I had almost forgotten about it. I had sent it in desperation, barely able to form the words. I was just hoping someone somewhere would care. The message came from a woman named Kelsey Romero, an attorney from a small nonprofit in San Diego. Her words were simple, almost cautious. I received your message. I believe we can help. Please call this number when you are able. I read it twice, then a third time. Something shifted in me, a thread pulling taut. I wasn't invisible, not completely. Rosa helped me make the call. The moment I heard Kelsey's voice, I felt a strange heat rise to my cheeks. She sounded younger than I expected, calm, clear, professional. She asked gentle questions, never pushing too far. She didn't speak over me. She didn't doubt me. She listened, and something about that shook me more than I was ready for. I told her everything, about James, about the trip, about how I woke up and he was gone, about the missing documents, about the rejection at the consulate. I didn't cry. Not then. I was too tired. But when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I will never forget. Laura, what he did is a crime. You are not alone, and you are not to blame. I hadn't heard words like that in a very long time. Kelsey explained that there were legal protections for people like me, that there were cases similar to mine, that women had been abandoned in foreign countries after being manipulated into signing immigration documents, that this was a tactic some men used to reset their lives, clean slates at the cost of someone else's existence. She called it what it was: immigration fraud, emotional abuse, trafficking of identity. And suddenly, I wasn't just a wife who had been left behind. I was a survivor of a system designed to forget women. Like me. She asked if I had any proof. I told her about the dinner receipt, about the photos on my old phone, about the one email I still had from James confirming the trip. It wasn't much, but it was something. She asked if I could scan them. I said yes, even though I didn't know how. Rosa found a local print shop that offered scanning for free when they heard my story. Within 48 hours, I had sent everything I had. And then, for the first time in weeks, I waited with something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Kelsey didn't promise miracles, but she promised effort. And in my world, that meant everything. She started digging. Her team searched for marriage records, found public photos, social media posts. That's when I saw it. The image that split my world in half again. It was a wedding photo, not ours, the new one. James stood in a white tuxedo, smiling. Beside him was a woman in a lace gown, blonde, tall, her hand resting on his chest like she belonged there. The caption read, "Starting our forever." The date was just 10 days after he left me in Tijuana. I stared at that photo for an hour, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. There it was, the proof, the confirmation. Everything I felt in my gut but was too afraid to say out loud. He had used my trust as a bridge to reach someone else. He had cleared me from his path like old furniture, then walked into a new life with my name still clinging to his paperwork. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how cleanly he had done it, how ordinary he looked in that photo, like nothing had happened, like I had never existed. Kelsey told me we could build a case, that we could apply for a special visa designed for victims of fraud and abuse. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. She asked me to write everything down, every detail, every memory, every paper trail. My hands trembled as I typed, but I did it. Page after page, I wrote myself back into existence. During those weeks, I began helping. Around the church more, cleaning, cooking, translating when I could, giving out blankets to women who looked exactly how I felt, empty, abandoned, hollowed out by the weight of someone else's choices. And slowly, I started to feel useful again, like my voice mattered, like my story had weight, not just because it was mine, but because it mirrored so many others. There was one woman, Anna, who arrived at the shelter bruised and silent. She didn't speak for days, but one night, I sat beside her and told her my story. Not all of it, just enough. Her eyes filled with tears. Then she whispered, "Me too." That moment changed everything for me, because I realized I wasn't just surviving for myself anymore. I was surviving for her, for every woman still waiting on a bench, still being silenced at a consulate, still wondering if they ever mattered at all. When I finally received the official copy of James's new marriage license, Kelsey sent it to me with a single sentence. "We've got him." It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was proof that I hadn't made it up, that I hadn't exaggerated, that what happened to me was real, and that the world, or at least one corner of it, was willing to fight back. If this story is stirring something inside you, please let it out. Say, "They didn't erase me," in the comments. Because your voice, your pain, your truth, it matters. And if someone you love is going through this, share this story with them. Let them know that there is a way out, that survival is not weakness, it is resistance. And if you believe in lifting each other out of silence, subscribe to this channel. Every subscription helps stories like this travel further, helps someone find light in the dark, helps the forgotten become unforgettable again. The court process felt like walking barefoot through glass. Every step toward justice reopened wounds I thought I had already bandaged. The legal system was never made for women like me. Women who had no papers, no money, no voice that carried weight in the language of power. But I had Kelsey, and I had something I hadn't had before. A name. My name. She helped me apply for a U visa. It's a type of protection granted to victims of serious crimes who assist law enforcement. Immigration fraud and abandonment qualified. Barely. The paperwork was endless. Every question forced me to relive what happened. Where did he take you? When did he leave you? What exactly did he say? I had to remember the color of the sheets in that hotel room, the sound of his laughter the night before he vanished, the wine we drank, the smell of his cologne. I felt like I was building a case not just for the government, but against the version of myself that had once loved him. That version still lived inside me, still whispered excuses in the dark, still clung to the dream that maybe, somehow, he didn't mean to do what he did. But I had to bury her now, not out of bitterness, but for survival. Kelsey was strategic. She knew the process would take time, years maybe. So we filed for a work permit while the U visa was pending. If approved, it would allow me to begin again, legally, with dignity. She also helped me gather statements from others who had witnessed my condition after the abandonment. Rosa wrote a letter. So did the church pastor, even the receptionist at the shelter, who remembered how I wouldn't speak for 3 days. These voices built a wall around me, a new kind of home, one made of belief. I started attending group meetings for women in similar situations. Each one had a different story, but the pattern was eerily familiar. Promises made in whispers, documents signed without translation, trips that ended with silence, and always the same expression in our eyes when we told our truths: shame, as if we had been complicit in our own disappearance. There was one woman named Yaritza. She had come from El Salvador. Her husband had married her in secret, told her she was too precious to share with anyone else. Then he took her to Honduras and left her with his cousin, who kept her locked in a room for 6 months. She escaped, barefoot, bleeding, still smiling somehow. She said, "They can take your body, but they cannot take your fire." I never forgot that. During this time, I also began volunteering at a women's shelter full-time, not just cleaning or organizing supplies, but actually sitting with the women, listening, letting them cry without being told to be strong. Sometimes, all I would do was hold a hand. Sometimes I would tell my story and watch their shoulders drop, their eyes soften. Recognition is a powerful healer. One afternoon, a young girl named Marisol came in. She was only 19, pregnant, barefoot. Her boyfriend had promised her love and safety. Instead, he drove her across the border and left her at a gas station. She had walked for 2 days to reach the church. When I handed her a blanket and some soup, she asked if I was a nun. I laughed for the first time in weeks. I told her, "No, mija, I'm just a woman who knows what it feels like to be erased." That night, I sat outside the shelter and looked up at the sky. The stars didn't blink or move. They just existed, unapologetically. And I decided I would too. I began documenting everything, not just for the court, for me, for my future. I wrote in a notebook every night, my fears, my memories, my hopes. I wrote letters to the version of myself that boarded that bus to Mexico thinking it was a vacation. I told her that she was brave, that her love was not foolish, that her trust was not her downfall. It was his. And slowly, I began to feel like I was taking up space again. Not because someone allowed me to, but because I chose to. James never responded to the legal notices. We found out he had moved again. Another woman, another lie. But that no longer surprised me. He was no longer the center of my story. He was just the storm that forced me to build a better foundation. Kelsey told me that the U visa process could still be delayed, that the system was overloaded, that I might be waiting years. But I didn't flinch, because I knew now how to wait without breaking. One morning, I woke up to an email. My work permit had been approved, just a temporary one. But it was real. My name was printed clearly. My photo looked tired but honest. I held it in my hands like a passport to a future I had earned inch by inch. That week, I applied for a job at a community clinic. They needed someone bilingual at the front desk, someone who could listen without judgment, someone who understood fear. I got the job. My first paycheck went to buying new shoes and sending money to my mother. When I told her over the phone, she cried for 5 minutes straight. She thought I had died, but now, she said, she knew I was alive, fully, finally. If you are listening to this and thinking that your story doesn't matter, I want you to hear me clearly. It does. You do. Say, I'm taking up space in the comments if you are ready to stop apologizing for existing. If you are still in the middle of your storm, just whisper it. That's enough. You're enough. And if you want to be part of a community that believes in starting over, in rebuilding from the ashes, in honoring the scarred but still standing, subscribe to this channel. Your voice here is sacred, and together, our stories become impossible to ignore. There is a particular kind of silence that only women like us know, the kind that follows you even into the loudest rooms, the kind that settles behind your eyes and clutches your throat when you try to speak. It's not just the absence of sound, it's the absence of being believed, of being seen, of being allowed to say, what happened to me was real. I lived in that silence for so long it became familiar, comfortable even. But healing has a way of creeping in when you least expect it, not all at once, not like a sunrise, but like a slow unfurling, a breath you didn't realize you were holding. Working at the clinic gave me a routine, a purpose. Most days were a whirlwind of forms, voices, crying babies, and exhausted mothers. But in the middle of all that chaos, I began to feel human again. People asked me for help. They trusted me with their pain. They said thank you. And I started to believe I had value beyond what was taken from me. There was an older woman who came in every Thursday, Señora Lucia. She had arthritis in her knees and would always bring pan dulce for the staff. She reminded me of my own mother, kind, tough, watchful. One afternoon, she grabbed my hand and said, "Mija, you have the eyes of someone who survived something terrible, but you're still here. Don't forget that part." That moment stayed with me, because for so long I defined myself by the things I lost, my marriage, my country, my name. But I hadn't seen myself as the woman who stayed, the woman who endured, the woman who began again with nothing. One evening, while filing papers, in the clinic's back office, I found an old flyer crumpled behind a drawer. It was for a storytelling workshop for immigrant women. No fee, no experience required, just a space to speak. I almost threw it away, but something stopped me. I folded it and placed it in my pocket. The following Saturday, I walked into a small community center, heart pounding. There were only 6 other women there, sitting in a circle of plastic chairs. I recognized one of them from the shelter. Another worked at the market near my apartment. We didn't know each other, but we knew each other. The facilitator, a soft-spoken woman with wild curls and ink stains on her fingers, asked us to write a letter, not to someone else, to ourselves, to the version of us that had survived. I stared at the blank paper for a long time. My hand shook. Then I wrote, "You are not what he did to you. You are not the night he walked away. You are the woman who stayed alive in the silence." When I read those words out loud, my voice cracked, my hands trembled. But no one laughed, no one looked away. They nodded, they cried with me, they saw me. That night I walked home under the moonlight, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. I kept attending that workshop, week after week. I told pieces of my story, not all at once, just slivers. Memories that used to weigh me down now became seeds. I planted them in the circle and watched them grow into understanding. The facilitator eventually asked if I would speak at a local event, a gathering for survivors of immigration trauma. I wanted to say no. My first instinct was to shrink, to hide, but something in me said yes. I spent 2 weeks preparing my story, practicing in front of the mirror, rewriting lines in the margins. I wanted it to be perfect, but the night before the event, I tore the paper in half. Perfection wasn't the point. Honesty was. On the day of the event, I stood on a small stage in a borrowed dress. My hands were cold. my throat dry, but when I opened my mouth, the words came. Not like a script, like a truth that had been waiting for its moment. I told them about the hotel in Tijuana, about the silence, about the shelter, about Rosa, about the court papers, about finding my name again. And when I finished, the room was silent, not the kind of silence that haunts, the kind that listens, then applause, soft at first, then rising, and I felt something crack open in me, a flood of warmth, of connection. I was no longer just a story, I was a voice. After that night, women began approaching me, some in tears, some in anger, all of them carrying pain that had no place to land. I became a vessel, not a savior, just someone who could say, I believe you. I started helping Kelsey host workshops for immigrant women, teaching them how to document their experiences, how to speak without shame, how to reclaim what was stolen. I met women from Nigeria, India, Brazil, Vietnam, every continent, every language, but the same silence. We broke it together. One afternoon, a teenager named Fatima pulled me aside after a session. She said, my father tells me to never talk about what happened, that people won't understand, but I heard your story, and now I know that silence is what keeps them winning. That sentence, that truth, it became my reason. If you are carrying something you've never said out loud, I want you to know this space is safe. You can speak here. You can be heard, even if it's just a whisper. Say, my voice matters in the comments if you are ready to be seen. You don't need to explain yourself. Just show up. That is enough. And if these stories help you breathe a little easier, remind you that healing is possible, please consider subscribing to this channel. Every name added here is a light in the dark for someone else still trying to find their way. Together, we are louder than silence. The first time I smiled without guilt was while planting basil in a community garden behind the shelter. It was a small patch of soil, tucked between a chain-link fence and the alley, barely 10 feet wide, but the sun hit it just right in the morning, and something about watching those green leaves sprout made me feel rooted again. Healing is not loud. It does not announce itself with fireworks or confetti. It comes in quiet moments, in the way your hands stop trembling when someone touches your shoulder, in the way your voice stops cracking when you say your own name. I had changed. The Laura who crossed the border thinking she was on a honeymoon no longer existed. And though I mourned her, I also realized she had done something extraordinary. She had loved, she had trusted, she had walked into a trap and still found a way out. That kind of love, even when betrayed, doesn't make you weak. It makes you powerful, because it means your heart still believes, even after being broken. I began teaching a weekly workshop at the shelter for women new to the country. Most of them had arrived under terrible circumstances, some fleeing violence, others tricked like I was. Some couldn't read or write, but they all had stories. One woman, Miriam, had walked from Guatemala with 2 children strapped to her back. She had been promised a job by a man who met her online. When she arrived in Tijuana, he took her documents and vanished. She slept in an abandoned bus with her children for 6 nights before someone found her. When she told me her story, I didn't say, I'm sorry. I said, I believe you. And that changed everything. Because sometimes, all a person needs is for their pain to be acknowledged. I taught them how to fill out forms, how to speak to authorities without shrinking, how to document every detail, even the ones they wanted to forget. I taught them how to speak their names like they were prayers. One morning, I got a letter in the mail. It had a government seal on it. My hands shook as I opened it. My U visa had been conditionally approved. It wasn't permanent yet, but it meant protection. It meant safety. It meant I was no longer one wrong question away from being sent back to a place I no longer belonged. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after reading it. The room was quiet. Sunlight spilled across the floor like spilled milk. I whispered thank you to no one in particular. Maybe to God, maybe to Rosa, maybe to the woman I used to be. That weekend, the shelter held a celebration, not just for me, for everyone. A small gathering with donated food and secondhand decorations. I wore a yellow dress someone had given me months ago that I never had the courage to wear. When I walked into the courtyard, the women clapped, not like I was a celebrity, but like I was proof that we could make it. They brought a cake. Someone had written the word survivor in pink icing. I cried when I saw it, not because I was sad, but because someone had called me what I had never dared to call myself out loud. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror again. This time I saw someone else, not the abandoned wife, not the undocumented woman, not the victim. I saw a leader, a guide, a survivor, a woman who had walked through fire and come out holding light. I started receiving messages from women online who had heard my story. Some were still trapped in silence. Others had just escaped. One wrote, "I thought I was crazy until I heard you speak. Now I know I'm not alone." Those words wrapped around me like a coat on a cold night, because that had been my deepest fear, that I was alone, that no one would ever understand. I reached out to Kelsey to thank her again. She told me something that stuck with me. She said, "The system isn't built to protect you, but people like you rebuild the system one story at a time." I began working with her on a new project, a resource center specifically for women abandoned or manipulated across borders, a place where they could find legal aid, shelter, counseling, and above all, each other. We named it Casa Esperanza, House of Hope. On the day it opened, a group of women cut the ribbon together. Not politicians, not donors, survivors, women who had once been voiceless and invisible, now standing tall with their heads high. Inside the building, we painted a mural. It showed a woman standing in a desert, her arms open, her shadow shaped like wings. Above her were the words, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." If you've ever felt buried, forgotten, left behind by someone who claimed to love you, you are not alone. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are a seed. Say, "I'm still growing" in the comments if you're finding your way back to yourself. Even if the soil is dry and the sun feels far away, you are growing. And that is everything. If this story touched something in your heart, if it reminded you of your worth or someone else's, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Not because numbers matter, but because every person here is part of a chorus that says, "We are still here, we are still rising, and we will not be silenced." The first time I walked into a courtroom without trembling, I realized how much power had been stripped from me. Not by him, not by the system, but by the idea that my life and my identity were negotiable. I had thought surviving was enough, but surviving was just the beginning. Justice was something else entirely. Justice was the reclamation of my existence. James had finally been located. Through tireless work by Kelsey and her team, they traced his steps to a new address in California. Another marriage, another woman, another version of the life he had taken from me without ever asking. The court documents showed that he had filed paperwork under my name for both his previous and current relationships. Fraud, identity theft, and abandonment were the charges. When I saw the evidence, I felt a mix of rage and disbelief. How could someone be so careful, so calculated, so cruel? But rage alone was not enough. I had learned that it had to be tempered with focus, with strategy, with the patient work of rebuilding. Kelsey explained the process. James would face legal consequences. He could lose his ability to sponsor anyone for immigration. He would face fines and restrictions. But most importantly, the records would show the truth, that I had been a victim, that my existence was real, that I had not consented, that I had survived. I started attending the hearings, sitting in the back, taking notes. The first time I saw him in court, I felt a strange calm. The man who had dominated my life, erased my identity, and left me stranded across a border, looked ordinary, unremarkable. Nothing like the figure he had been in my imagination during those long nights of fear. And yet, he was exactly as I remembered, smug, confident, certain that no one would believe the version of reality I carried. But they did. Slowly, meticulously, Kelsey presented the case. She explained how he had used my trust as a weapon, how he had manipulated the immigration system, how he had abandoned me in a foreign country with no documents, no money, and no voice. She showed receipts, emails, travel itineraries, testimonies from the shelter. Every piece of evidence built a wall around me, a fortress of truth that no lie could penetrate. One day, the judge looked directly at me. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I realized that my presence in that room was more than symbolic. It was proof that a person who is abandoned, erased, and silenced can return, can claim a seat at the table, can demand recognition. I spoke quietly but firmly, recounting the experience, my words cutting through the sterile air of the courtroom. I described the fear, the isolation, the constant uncertainty. I told them about Rosa, about Kelsey, about the women I had met and supported since my escape. I told them about myself, fully, without apology. Outside the courtroom, after one particularly long session, I walked along the sidewalk, sunlight catching my hair. I realized something important. Justice was not the final chapter. It was part of the journey. The U visa, the work permits, the court victories, they were markers, not conclusions. They were proof that I had survived not just by endurance, but by reclaiming my agency. I returned to the shelter, and the women there noticed the shift. My voice was stronger, my instructions more confident. When they asked me how I stayed so calm, I told them that strength comes from knowing you are reclaiming what belongs to you. That fear loses power when you name it and show it to the world. That silence only dominates if you let it. With my work permit and court progress, I enrolled in evening classes to advance my English and legal knowledge. I wanted to help others understand the system that had been used against us. I wanted to teach them how to protect themselves. Every class, every new skill, every lecture was another brick in the foundation I was building under my own name. I remember the first paycheck I received after being legally employed. It was small, barely enough to cover rent and groceries, but it was mine, earned by my labor, protected by law, untainted by someone else's manipulation. I bought a notebook and a pen. Every night I wrote down what I learned in court, what I experienced, the things I wished I had known before. It became a manual for survival, a testament for other women who might find themselves trapped in invisible cages. James eventually faced restrictions. He could no longer sponsor spouses for immigration. He was fined. The court records held him accountable. But that was not my victory. My victory was reclaiming my life, walking freely without fear, speaking without trembling, building a future that he could not touch. And yet, I never spoke of vengeance. I never wished harm on him. I wished only to exist fully, to live fully, to help others do the same. The power was never in punishment. The power was in presence, in claiming space that had been denied, in saying, I survived, I am here, I matter. Every day, I help women who arrive at the shelter, sometimes barefoot, sometimes with children in their arms, often carrying the same silence that once nearly consumed me. I tell them the truth, that survival is a start, that courage is contagious, that a story told is more powerful than fear. If you have ever felt powerless, in the face of betrayal, leave a comment. Say, I am reclaiming myself. If you are taking your first steps toward your own truth, speak it even if no one else is listening. Your voice is part of a chorus that cannot be ignored. And if you believe that stories can protect, educate, and empower, subscribe to this channel. Every subscriber strengthens a network of women who refuse to be erased. Every story shared builds a foundation for those who will come after us. Together, our voices are unstoppable and our presence unshakable. I have walked a long road, and when I say long, I mean a road that felt endless, stretching through deserts of doubt, storms of betrayal, and nights darker than I thought the world could hold. I have learned things about myself I never imagined. I learned that survival is not merely existing. Survival is claiming your space, your voice, your rights, and refusing to let anyone erase your existence. I learned that the body can bend and break, but the spirit can remain unyielding if you nurture it with patience and purpose. And I learned that love, when twisted and weaponized, can feel like imprisonment. But the same heart that once trusted blindly can rise again, wiser and stronger. When I look at my reflection now, I see someone who endured more than anyone should have to endure. I see the woman who boarded a bus to Mexico thinking she was going to a honeymoon and ended up fighting to reclaim her life. I see a survivor, a teacher, a guide for those still finding their way. My eyes carry the stories of countless women who have been silenced, abandoned, and erased. They shine not with anger, but with resilience, not with bitterness, but with clarity. They shine because they know the weight of injustice, and they carry the light forward. I have rebuilt my life slowly, but deliberately. My mornings begin with gratitude. I open my eyes, stretch my arms wide, and say thank you for being here, for being free, for being capable of creating change. I volunteer, I speak, I teach, and I listen. Every woman I meet, every story I hear, is a reminder that my pain has purpose, that my journey was never just for me. It was and continues to be for the women who are still trapped in silence, for the girls who are learning that their worth is not negotiable, for the mothers who cry silently because the world has not yet seen them. I still carry scars, physical and invisible, etched into memory and body alike, but these scars do not define me. They are evidence of my survival, markers on a map of resilience, and with them, I have built a sanctuary in my life, a home of understanding, of compassion, and of action. I have helped create programs for women escaping manipulation and fraud, guided newcomers through legal systems that can be intimidating and cold, and provided a voice where there was none. The most profound lessons I have learned are simple. First, your voice matters, even when you feel small. Second, your story is your power, even when others try to silence it. Third, survival is not just about escaping a dangerous place or person. It is about reclaiming the life you were denied, the freedom you were denied, and the identity that was stripped from you. Each step forward, no matter how small, is revolutionary. I remember walking into the shelter one morning, watching the women around me laugh, share, cry, and heal together. I realized then that the journey I had dreaded was transforming into a mission, that the loneliness I endured became empathy, that the fear I felt became courage, that the helplessness I knew became empowerment. And I understood in that moment that the greatest freedom is not only surviving your past, but using it to illuminate a path for others. To anyone watching this, I want to leave you with this thought. No matter how dark the night, no matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how invisible you feel, your story has value. You have the strength to reclaim your life. You have the ability to rise. And you have the right to be seen, to be heard, and to be celebrated for your resilience. Remember, you are not alone, and your presence matters more than you may ever know. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me, for listening, and for allowing this story to be shared. Your time, your attention, and your compassion make these stories matter. They remind me that survival is not solitary. It is communal, it is collective, and it is sacred. If this story has touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, I encourage you to continue this journey. Click on the next video that will appear on your screen. Let it guide you further, empower you more, and remind you that the path forward is always possible. Together, through these stories, we are learning, healing, and rising. And together, we are unstoppable. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in survival, hope, and the power of the human spirit.